I don't know if you got all the text messages that I sent you.
I have not read them yet.
This article is something else. So before we get started, I want to talk about something. So the listeners know, we usually meet every week, and due to internet issues and just general backlog for editing episodes, we chose not to meet last week. So I had more time than usual to do some research, some reading, some listening. I've listened to a lot of interviews with Damon Lindelof. I'm reading a phenomenal article by Javier Grillo Marxuach, who was a writer in the first season and the second season. In fact, the only writer who transferred from first season to second season, not including Damon Lindelof and Carlton Cuse. And I feel the need to... I don't know if I want to apologize for some of the things that I have said about Damon Lindelof, because I do feel them very strongly. I do feel that Damon Lindelof has a penchant for needless contrivance in storytelling and tends to go way overboard on the troubled family tropes. All of that said, from the interviews with him that I have been listening to and watching, and from the articles that I have been reading, I feel that I have a much better understanding of the pressures and the just sheer obstacles in his way making the show. I know that this probably sounds like Lindelof came to my house and threatened my family. That's not, I'm trying to choose my words carefully here, because as I was texting to you, Derek, before we started this, one of the things that we talked about either on our very first episode or during our pilot episode recording is that we talked about how Lloyd Braun was who was the head of ABC at the time, was a huge advocate for the series and really, really wanted to make it happen, and was pretty much the guy who got the ball rolling and who gave Lost his blessing. And you had mentioned that you had heard that the president of ABC had come into the show, and basically the previous guy had greenlit this thing. He had no idea what to do with it. You mentioned something like that, right?
Yeah, and like he knew he was going to be fired or something, so he was like, fuck it, it's not my problem.
So it turns out Lloyd Braun did leave as the head of ABC sometime during the production, and Stephen McPherson came on during the production and very much was, I don't want to say in the dark, but basically was handed this as a legacy and did not have the belief in it that Lloyd Braun did. He basically was like, all right, well, I guess I have this thing now. I don't want to drone on too long about this because this could be a whole separate episode, but learning about the things that the writing team had to not do, what they had to do, the fact that the network consistently told them that they didn't want it to be a sci-fi show and that anything that was remotely woo-woo like that was shot down. The number of episodes, the number of seasons, the fact that Lindelof did not come on to the show expecting to be showrunner, the fact that it was meant to be J.J. Abrams and that he was very much thrown into the driver's seat, and that J.J., his visits to the show and his creative direction became less and less, much more quickly than was expected. I learned that Lindelof actually fell into a very dark place for a while, just a very depressed place because of just the pressures that he had to undergo and the breakneck pace of having to figure out characters and stories and everything. I still maintain my criticisms of Lindelof, but I have a lot more respect for what he had to go through and the fact that he and his writing team, his rotating cast of writers, were able to put together as coherent a story as they were. We can talk more in the future about the different revelations of Marxuach and the things that Lindelof has said since then. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to say that at the top, that making any kind of entertainment is difficult, especially one that has as many masters as Lost had. And if I've given Lindelof flack in the past, I now amend that somewhat to just say he did a good job, I guess. I don't know. It's been a very enlightening couple weeks.
As you've been talking, I've been perusing this article, because okay, so my understanding is this is no longer live. You had to get this from the Internet Archive.
Yeah, it's so I got this as always, I have a debt to Lostpedia for linking to all this stuff. A lot of the stuff Lostpedia links out to is no longer it no longer exists. Thankfully, this article does, which dates back to looks like November 13th, 2015. But the title of the article is The Lost Will and Testament of Javier Grillo Marx Watch. As he lays out at the beginning of the article, he wanted a place where he could just sort of ramble about Lost and answer all of the questions that he is consistently asked and give his memoir, because he left after the second season. And as he mentions there, he didn't really watch the show until the series finale. So, he mentions how a lot of the ideas that they had, the motto in the writer's room was, that's what we're going with until somebody comes up with a better idea. So the smoke monster was initially a security system for the island that did judge the island's inhabitants and weigh or measure the good and evil within them. He says that, the names Jacob and the Man in Black, those never even existed when he was there. As to what the island was, he makes a very vague reference to that Carlton Cuse and Damon Lindelof did have a working idea of what the island was, but since that never ended up coming to fruition in the show, and they've never mentioned in interviews, he says that he's not going to say what that was. So I just have to assume it's aliens.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Boy, I can't wait to actually really sink into this. Because I mean,
it's so long. It's very long. I think it's definitely worth reading.
I see a screenshot here that says Nazis use the island. I see. He mentioned something that we've talked about a bit with, like, hey, why isn't Saeed the lead? He mentions like reading how they were going to kill Jack, and he's like, yeah, you can't kill the white guy.
Yep.
And says he's like, because otherwise, what, you've got either the reformed Iraqi torturer, a overweight Mexican, or a middle-aged white guy with delusions of grandeur. Which I'm like, wow, blunt.
Well, and this is coming from Grillo Marx Watch, who is I believe Latino
or Puerto Rican, but yeah.
Thank you. Okay, he's Puerto Rican, and this is him saying like, look, I know how to write for TV, and I'm telling you, you can't kill the white guy. Which also brings me back to something that's not in this article, but that is in one of the interviews that I listened to with Damon Lindelof, where he talks about how, something that we've mentioned many, many times is, the underserving of Harold Perrineau as Michael. And then Damon Lindelof said that one of his big regrets about the show is that they didn't do well by Michael, and that he did not feel comfortable writing a black character, and therefore, instead of finding writers who could write with that voice, kind of ignored it. And he is very apologetic about that. Oh, and also, Grillo Marx Watch is very adamant that the island was never purgatory at any point, ever, ever, ever. But yeah, it's fascinating reading this stuff and realizing that, because I think we've been pretty fair. We understand that it's a network show and that it was very popular and that there were mandates from the ABC about what could and couldn't be in the show. But reading these guys talking about this stuff and seeing what incredible forces they were up against, and the fact that they had a really solid idea of what the characters were, but even something as simple as the flashbacks, they had not even considered that the flashbacks would be a running device in the series until they were working on Tabula Rasa. The fact that the flashbacks existed in the pilot was not indicative of how the show would be. That was sort of just showing, how did they get to this point? It was only during the breaking of the story that they were like, wait, what if every episode did that? And that way it doesn't just give us a way to contrast, but it also gives us a way to not just have them grimy and grubby, but also, have them in regular clothes and show what the real world was like.
Yeah, man, oh man. Okay, yeah, I gotta minimize this. I just got to him positively talking about Lindelof and how he's like, look, this guy's a genius.
Yeah, he's very complimentary.
And yeah, network demands. Well, even because I saw in here that they referred to the others as the Jungle Creeps.
The Jungle Creeps, which I'm so sad that didn't didn't carry
Didn't
over.
take. Or even like a little like nod to it in like the sixth season would have been nice. But yeah, he mentions in it that the network was really against it.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm thinking, well, that's probably why they killed Ethan. It wasn't. It was probably a prerequisite or a requisite from the powers that be.
Remember where we were talking about how Charlie says that he doesn't remember anything at the end of the episode where they kidnapped him? They actually were going to have it that he had amnesia, and that Hurley, when they couldn't figure out what his flashback was going to be, it was going to be that he was a repo man and he hypnotized people to get them to give him their stuff, and that was his thing. And that Hurley was going to hypnotize an amnesic Charlie to find out where they took Claire. And that story breaking took place when Damon Lindelof was on a break, and he came back and he was like, fuck, no, that is not what we're going to do in this show. That's not what Hurley's thing is.
That's hilarious. I did see, too, that they mentioned that one of their B storylines was that Shannon trades sexual favors for things like sunscreen.
Yep.
Which adds a little bit of context, because I know we had questions about this when she's trying to get something from Sawyer, and he's like, I'll take an eye on you. Something tells me you're good for it. And she like walks away disgusted. And we're like, was that meant to be like an innuendo or what's going on? And it's like, I wonder if they were like, yeah, no, because that's in their head canon. That's what she's been doing on the island. It's just like,
yeah, it does add some heretofore unknown context to that weird moment. It's oh man.
Yeah, which is also just a different Shannon than I felt that it's just this sounds fascinating.
And I am gonna share this one last thing. It's the quote that I sent you about the Black Rock. I'm going to quote this verbatim from Javier Grillo Mark's Watch. One afternoon, Damon rushed into the writer's room and asked, to no one in particular, so what is the Black Rock? Paul Dini lifted his head from his sketchpad. He was and is an accomplished doodler, and plainly stated, it's an 18th century sailing ship that got beached on the island. Damon exclaimed something to the effect of, sold, and quickly left the room, a new piece of canon born from raw improvisation, colliding with something that had been planned in the pilot script months before. Amazing. Absolutely.
That is incredible.
So yeah, I'm sorry to just drop all of this stuff on you right at the top, but it's just I've been so excited about reading this that I feel like I've gotten one of the most solid glimpses into the writer's room than I've ever gotten just with this article alone. And it also answers something that I was curious about for this particular episode, because this is the first episode that we're talking about today that was written by Carlton Cuse and Damon Lindelof. And I was curious when Cuse became co-showrunner with Lindelof, because up until this point, JJ was the ostensible showrunner, and then it devolved to Lindelof, and then Lindelof was very quickly getting burned out. Cuse was the showrunner who had given Lindelof his first break on Nash Bridges, which ran from 1996 to 2001, and Lindelof brought him on, the former mentee bringing on the mentor, and Cuse almost immediately started, I don't want to say writing the ship, because that's not an accurate way to describe it, but started organizing things better, really helped define the direction that the series was going, and helped be sort of a manager so that Lindelof could be more of the creative force behind the show. So that answers a question that I had, which is when did it go from just Lindelof to Lindelof and Cuse?
Interesting. And actually, this whole preamble does serve, I have a bit of a segue / before really dive into the meat of this episode. Similarly, as far as disclaimers go, I got to kind of backtrack on something I said. Because I know that when we talked about Walkabout, I mentioned how I do think it's a great episode, but this is when Lost starts throwing in a bunch of stuff that they don't answer. And this episode does something similar. However, this does it way better. And I will expand on that I'll expand on it right now. In Walkabout, when Locke becomes face to face with whatever the monster is, it leaves you there going like, well, what the hell? We saw it eat someone, and he's fine. What happened?
Yeah.
Tell me what happened. And this one, yeah, you find that there's a plane with priests who were drug dealers, and it's a mystery. It's a question, but it's not like I need to know now, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. I think that that's a big part of this episode for me, is that it did world building right, where instead of either having a core plot element of the show be hanging on a mystery, it just plants the seed of a bunch of stuff, including the hatch being about 50 times bigger than I thought it was up until this episode. There's a plane in the middle of the jungle. It basically just, and this actually was helpful because the last 4 episodes I've been pretty lukewarm on. Again, not bad TV, certainly not whatever the case may be, or The Sun Also Rises, or the House of the Rising Sun.
Yeah.
Although I also don't like the Hemingway novel, The Sun Also Rises, but that's a different conversation. But I realized that I think part of what made me not like those 4 episodes was that they all made the island feel so small.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at something like Homecoming, we already talked about how each one basically goes over one thing. But in Homecoming, you have this titillating others factor, and then you shoot the others dead, end of storyline. And it's like, oh, so we're not gonna find out more about the others, are we? In Outlaws, it may not necessarily have ended something that titillating, but Sawyer is attacked by a boar. He goes in the jungle and finds said boar, and it's like, oh, this jungle is much smaller than I thought it was, that for him to have just found a boar. In translation, it's all about the boat on the beach, and then it's almost like a sitcom where it resets at the end, where it's like, yeah, the boat burned, now it's being rebuilt. Okay. And I'm realizing that Numbers with Hurley was especially egregious in this, because not only do we get Hurley retreading the path that Saeed took, but in half the time, but, for a French woman who's been living on the island for 16 years, yeah, he just finds her. And then even when you find something that would almost imply that the island is a lot bigger and more mysterious than you think, when they find a bridge and the bridge goes out, it's like, oh man, how are they ever going to get over there? 5 minutes later, they just had to go around.
Yeah, they're just there. They just got there.
So I think all of that stuff makes the island feel small. Like, we're retreading all the same parts. Like, the island feels like a very small playground, more like a small sandbox rather than an actual island. This episode significantly broadens the scope. Again, not just with small things like, oh, they've dug up more of the hatch. Oh, it's colossal, and it's not even all the way unburied yet. Oh, there's a plane that just was in here. Oh, there's other dead bodies, so clearly other people were here at one time. It started to actually be like, there's a lot more to this, and not the least of which being looking at someone like Locke, who, yeah, we know his story is that he was in a wheelchair and now he's not, and then they just out of nowhere add this thing that in no way, at least I know eventually we'll get there, but it doesn't at all impact the fact that he was in a wheelchair. This has nothing to do with that. This is just a separate story. And it's like, oh, yeah, there's a lot more to this character and this world, which is all a roundabout way of me saying I liked it. I liked it a lot. This episode was great.
I liked it a lot as well. To your point of it makes the island much more interesting and larger, my main note for this episode is that I love the fact that we get this vision/dream that Locke has, where we get very explicit proof that the island is telling Locke something. And that is really cool to me. Like, the fact that it's actually showing him something, that we don't know why it's guiding Locke. We don't know to what end, but the island is showing that it has a power, and it is manifesting it in a very blatant way, where it's not just giving him a vision, but also taking away this gift that it's given to him, or that Locke's faith in the island, because it's being shaken, is causing him to lose the ability to walk again. I like that mystical stuff. By the end, I've watched this episode twice now, and the thing that I came away with is that for all of my criticisms of the show, one of the things that they never spoiled was that the island itself, like, let's forget about Jacob, let's forget about the Man in Black, let's forget about the numbers. The island itself always remains this weird, mysterious force. We have the idea of like the cork and that it stops evil or whatever, but in terms of, we know that the island wants things and the island does things. And I like that of all of the mysteries that I wanted answers to, I never really needed an answer to what is the island, because I like that it's just this thing. It's this unknowable, ineffable thing that could almost be considered a god in some ways, or even beyond a god. Like, it's just this weird fucking thing on the center of the earth or something. Like, it's just, I love how weird it is. I love how it gives this weird vision, and the idea that maybe it is telling Locke, you need to sacrifice Boone. That's pretty crazy. Yeah, I love that. I love that hinky-jinky stuff.
I love it too. I think that that's some of its strongest stuff, especially in those sort of faith and existential questions of, well, as you know, people who are not nut jobs have said with aliens, if there's like a 2% difference in DNA between us and an orangutan, there is no way that an alien species is something we could even comprehend. Like, let's assume it's a higher intelligence that has just 4% difference in DNA. We might not even be able to perceive something like that. It may be on a different spectrum of light, like it's in that regard. I think that stuff, how you could take something like that and apply it to spirituality, as like, in the same way that people will look for signs from the heavens, and because there's no proper channel or medium, they may misinterpret what the signs are. I think that it's fascinating when you watch an episode like this with that in mind, and as Locke is losing control over his legs and his ability to walk, yeah, he stops right at the place where he should to get a window into, oh, here's something from my vision. I enjoy that a lot. I think that the island as just this, unknowable thing that isn't just an island. It is something greater. It is exciting. And I saw too in that article that you just said when I was browsing through that there's like a writer's note of like, what is the island? It's the epicenter of good and evil or something like that. And it's like, I'm all right with that. If that was always the plan, that's really interesting. I guess actually we should probably rewind and do a welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, now that we're 30 minutes into the episode, welcome to the podcast, brother.
Welcome to the podcast, brother.
Today we are talking about episode 19 of ABC's Lost, Deus Ex Machina. It originally aired on March 30th, 2005. It was written by Carlton Cuse and Damon Lindelof, and it was directed by Robert Mandel. I'm Pierce Nahigian, the elder brother.
I'm Derek Hobson, the younger brother. Welcome to Losing Lost.
And I think this will be the first time that I've remembered to say this. If you are listening to this on a podcasting platform of your choice, please write a review, give us a like. If you listen to us on YouTube, subscribe, give us a like. I don't know how else to say that without sounding needy. But it helps us.
There is no way. You're gonna take that index finger and just smash that like button.
Smash that like button. And also, this thank you will come several weeks past when it is first intended. But we've been looking at the analytics, and people are listening to the show. People are downloading it. People seem to be watching it on YouTube. And so, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for listening. This is just a fun little project for me and Derek, and it's nice that if it's bringing joy to other people, and even just as a curiosity or a fun little shot of nostalgia?
Yeah, thank you. And if you do leave a comment, perhaps we will read them and respond to them on a later episode. I don't know.
No, absolutely. Yeah. No, we'd happy to do so. Would be thrilled to do so. Yeah, I don't know. Where do we go from that? Do we just get into the episode, or we?
I really like this episode. This felt like The Lost I Remember. Again, it's so interesting to me in a way that sometimes it's hard to know what makes a good episode of Lost until you get injected a good episode of Lost.
Yeah.
Because, again, the last 4 weren't bad. And I think there's some amazing character moments. I think there's some great scenes. I think Hurley's flashback is a delight. I think Sawyer's has some good stuff. Although in hindsight, knowing that he has that one of him just kind of gripping his gun in his pocket as he asks for spicy shrimp probably could have been cut down. But, it's not that those episodes are bad. They're kind of like, where do we go from here? And an episode like this really opens up what you're allowed to do. It feels like the part in a video game. They're like, you have to stay in this little box. And once you complete the first few missions, then they're like, okay, here's the map. And that's what this episode feels like to me. It's like, oh, we're through the tutorial. We can play now. And I really liked it. I really, really liked it. Because even, again, the flashback, I think, is so telling for where the show goes. Because this has nothing to do with him being in a wheelchair.
Nice little fake out, though, that it makes you think that it is.
But, that's the thing, is it's just like a complete, if you think about all of our other characters thus far, again, Kate's, I don't want to retread Kate's. All that we've learned is why Kate, or no, not even why, but we just learned that at one point Kate was in Australia. And then also that she's been on the run for a while. Jax, as much as I know you love the White Rabbit, it kind of explains what was he doing in Australia. Mm-hmm. And then all the best cowboys have daddy issues, which is still my top ranking episode in my head so far. It just kind of, it gives you the prequel to White Rabbit. Yeah. So, it's still like all the characters that we've received a second flashback of thus far, it's still been pretty linear. This is the first flashback that to me is like, this isn't linear at all. This is a completely different thing. And I think that's awesome.
So I was going back through the last 4 episodes. So episode 14 was Special, which we both liked a lot. And then the last 4 episodes are Homecoming, Outlaws, In Translation, and Numbers. And I think on the whole, I enjoyed those episodes more than you did. I loved Outlaws, I liked In Translation, and I really enjoyed Numbers a lot. And I think you're right about that they were smaller. It really felt like, and we've already established, right, that those episodes were ones that were greenlit after the initial run of 12 or 13 episodes, whatever number that was. And as much as I like those episodes, it does feel like they are entirely character episodes. It's just really showing you this is who this person is. You move the plot a little bit forward, the story a little bit forward, but mostly what those are just character studies. And this episode sets up the end game for the first season, because this is immediately going to lead into Claire having her baby. It's going to lead into Jack hunting down Locke and finding out about the hatch. It's going to lead to us getting to the Black Rock. This is where the forward momentum starts. And it starts with a very definite confirmation that whether it's all in his head or whether it's actual magic, the island is guiding Locke somewhere. It seems pretty hard to explain away how he would know about the Beechcraft, but it's very much like, this is the show. This is the show you're watching. there is magic on this island, and it is a guiding force, possibly malevolent. Its idea of good and evil might not be your idea of good and evil. So,
well, one of my favorite books, Why Religion Matters by Houston Smith, talks about how, in talking about the cosmic grand scheme of things, as an answer to the question, why do bad things happen? He brings up, when you have a 4-year-old and you give them an ice cream cone, and after they lick it, the ice cream plops off the cone, hits the sidewalk, and they melt. They are just in tears. They are screaming. The world is ending. And while a parent who maybe has to deal with debts and a mortgage, and for all we know, a lawsuit or work layoffs, etc., who know the world, they're like, it's an ice cream. This is not the end of the world. But on a relative sliding scale to that 4-year-old, this is quite literally the worst thing that could happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so they said, there is a possibility here that were you to then zoom out on a cosmic scale to a creature like God, that would be, for all we know, all-knowing, all-powerful, something like a Holocaust could come across to a cosmic being as nothing more than humanity's dropped ice cream cone.
Jesus.
And I want to just say that as a person, not a God, yeah. I feel that the Holocaust is the worst. Eddie, yeah. But I just mean that in trying to put it into perspective, when people ask that question, why do bad things happen? And I think that it's neat that this episode toys with that idea by, sending a clear, what we assume is a clear message. And then it's like, oh, your priests, they were drug dealers. And it's like, were they forces of good? What is, and of course, this is one of the few reveals that I feel has a significant payoff. And I say that because there are two things that I'll mention them when we get to them. But when we talk about, and I saw actually again in that article you sent that he had a note from JJ that said, don't show them how the trick is done. And it's like, no, you can show how the trick is done if it's good. When you do it bad, that's when it's a problem.
That's a really, that was very well put, and makes me want to read this book. And it's horrifying, but it also realistically puts into perspective, what a godlike being or a god, what their perspective would be. And now I can't stop thinking about God talking to somebody who died in the Holocaust and them explaining how terrible it was, and him just looking at them and going, but for me, it was Tuesday.
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus. But yes, and but that is exactly the point that I'm making with the island, is that this is we don't know anything about this thing. We don't know, how long it's been there. It could be timeless. It could be like the house and House of Leaves. It just predates the Earth. The will of the island is maybe benevolent, but not in a sense that we recognize as benevolence.
Yeah. You can cut this part out, but I gotta mention this because I know I shared this with you. Did you ever watch? It's a long watch. I think it's like an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. The YouTube video on the custom Doom level that was inspired by House of Leaves.
No, you've told me about it, or you sent me the link. I think I don't think I've actually watched it yet.
It's as a guy goes through it. So, he walks through a room and he's like, that's odd. But he also starts explaining this is why this is fascinating. This is where the inspiration comes from. And it is,
you're already giving me the heebie-jeebies. That book is still the creepiest, scariest thing I've ever read.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Yeah.
And I know someday it will be adapted into either a TV show or a movie, and nothing on earth will compare to just the act of reading that book. Nothing comes close.
I don't know. Well, and just as another digression in terms of shows that are clearly inspired by Lost without being Lost, I was thinking about this more because I think it was a few episodes ago we had talked about how would you do Lost today if you
Mm-hmm.
did do it. I think we were like, although you could do just a flat reboot and just call it Lost, chances are higher that they wouldn't do that, that they will do something more akin to something like a manifest, or like it's not going to be called Lost. It's going to have all the trappings of Lost, but it's not going to be called like it's not going to be a one-to-one kind of thing. And I was thinking about this more because I just recently was in the background rewatching Haunting of Hill House, and that is 1,000% inspired by the narrative structure of Lost, and it's
Oh,
glorious.
the book is very, yeah, I stopped watching it because I liked the book a lot, and I was like, oh, this doesn't, they're doing a different thing. But I haven't watched it past, but I like the guy who, the showrunner, he did
Yeah, yeah.
he's done a couple
I
horror films
forget
that I
his
really
name.
like.
Yeah, he's great. And obviously he did Bly Manor and Midnight Mass, and I forget what movie he did. He did Oculus.
Did he?
Yes, which
I
I
thought it
really
was,
like.
isn't it the guy who did I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House? Have you seen that one?
No,
That
I
is a
don't know who.
wonderfully creepy ghost movie, and it's not like, I showed it to Maddie and she really didn't think it was scary at all, and I think about that movie all the time. It's more of like, it's not like scary in the sense of like boo, and but it's just like, it's just kind of quietly haunting. Like it's very
I mean, to be honest, that's how I feel about House of Leaves, because
mm-hmm,
even just the idea that the house that you live in, I think of it as like when you've lived in a same space, even if it is just an apartment, if you've known it for a while, you wake up and it's dark, you typically know like, oh, I like, my brain knows, it's mentally mapped. I know where
mm-hmm.
everything is. So to have a house that is changing shape when you try and walk around, I was like, yeah, that would be so. One of the most unsettling things that I'm certain is universal is when you wake up and you've like somehow been like perpendicular to where you would normally be on the bed. So when
Mm-hmm.
you wake up, it's suddenly like, whoa, 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 what's the window doing over there? And then you're like, oh, I must have rolled in the night. But that initial like, where the hell am I?
Yep.
To me, like that's the feeling of House of Leaves, but for like 2,000 pages. Uh,
Or
uh,
even just like waking up, like, or falling asleep somewhere when you didn't intend to fall asleep, and just waking up and being like, I don't know, where I am. Um, yeah,
all of
God.
which is to say
Yeah, yeah.
that I think that Lost, if it were, or sorry, I think that House of Leaves is similar in that I think that you would never get a show called House of Leaves, but I think things like the Doom level that I will resend you because it's seriously like I was captivated. I mean, I listened to it at 1.5 speed just because who's got that kind of time, but it is absolutely like okay, this you got me. And at one point when they hit the spiral staircase, I'm like, this is exactly what I thought it would be.
Yeah.
I hate,
Oh man. Because
um
that's too,
it
like,
is.
that's also what's incredible about the book, is that by itself, the interior of this space, except for the fact that it doesn't have any lights in it, is a house. It's got all this regular architecture. There's nothing intrinsically scary inside of it. And yet it has taken the shape of a house. It is just a house that goes on and on and on and on. And there's no explanation for why it does that, or if it wants anything, or why it's there. But there is something inside there, and it is following you. And it's, huh. Oh, like the scene where they're like the hunter guys like shooting, and like all those doors just start slamming and slamming and slamming and slamming and slamming. Oh my God. Anybody
Yeah,
who's listening to this, if we keep this in the podcast, go read House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. It is phenomenal. It is work. It is hard work to read it because of the very, very unique structure. But good God, it is so worth it.
yeah, yeah. um and just bring it all the way back. I think that if they rebooted Lost,
I'm so sorry.
No. Because I love it. And again, I think House of Leaves would do the same thing. But I think that if they rebooted Lost, I think they would almost start it where season 4 is. I think that there would be people, and Hill House does this basically, where Hill House, their island is the house.
Right.
There were supernatural elements. There was certainly a climactic event that they don't really reveal to you until the very end, and it's a little lackluster. So it's kind of like Lost that way too. But I, the house serves as the island, but like where we start is all of these characters who are nowhere near the house. And I was like, if you were to do Lost today, that's how you do it. You do the opposite approach of like, you're just following characters who are in the world, but they're getting these little hints of like, you could have a character that's like Jack, where, someone's like, someone's in the emergency room. Oh, okay, I'll run over there. And he goes into the ER and sees someone there, and maybe it's an overweight Mexican man. And he has a moment with him where he's like, oh. And you get this impression that there's something between you guys. What's going on here? And like little by little, the flashbacks are like, at one time, these two were shipwrecked on an island together and some crazy shit went down. And they're trying to get back to normal.
I love that idea. So you're saying the flashbacks are them on the island?
Yeah.
It takes place in the present day, and the flashbacks are that's a great idea. That's how you reboot Lost. That's what you do. That's great. That's great. Oh man. Oh, I love that. That's how you keep it fresh, because like in the modern day, they're going on with their lives, but we know that some weird shit happened on the island and continued to that's good. That's good. Did you just come up with that?
Well, today, yeah. But
that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's great.
Like, because you can have like crazy things happening, and like people could be like, oh, what are the chances? And like everyone who is like a main player is like, yeah, they know that there's a higher power. Anyway, I think it. I'm glad to hear you're on board. We can talk about the episode.
That's actually like, because then you have the opposite of the show, but it's still the same mystery show, in that they have all been confronted with this force that's beyond them and are having to grapple with it being back in the real world, where they're trying to, I imagine most of them would be trying to ignore it. Some of them probably aren't. Like you would have a character like Hurley who would be probably back in a sanitarium, which I think is what happens in season 4 anyway. I think that's a really smart way to do it. And if they do it, they should do it that way. I like it.
And then you'd have characters that are like, you'd only see in the flashback, and you're like, did they die? Are they still on the island? What happened? But anyway. All right. I'm ready.
Okay. So we begin in a flashback with Locke working at either a Toys R Us or a Walmart. And this is clearly before he worked at the box company, because not only does he have hair, but he can walk. And he shows a kid the game Mousetrap. He says it's his favorite game, and he used to play it with his brother. And we know that Locke was in foster homes, and we know that he also had a sister who came back as a dog, or didn't. So it's interesting that Locke probably had many brothers and sisters over the years, if he was raised in a series of foster homes. And then a strange woman, played by Swoosie Kurtz, is watching him. She asks him where the footballs are, and he directs her to aisles 8 and 15. I originally looked up, I was like, where do I know Swoosie Kurtz from? Because her face is so familiar. And she's just been in a billion things. The only thing that I could point to with any authority is she's the mom in Bubble Boy.
Oh, interesting. She has a very familiar face.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have. I honestly can't visualize the mom in Bubble Boy. I do remember liking Bubble Boy though.
It probably does not hold up.
It probably.
Very early Jake Gyllenhaal movie.
That was Jake Gyllenhaal?
Yeah, that was Jake Gyllenhaal.
All right, I'll come back to that later. Okay. A couple things about this scene. Number one, and this is a little bit of a production note. How old is Locke supposed to be?
I actually have an answer for you on this because I looked this up.
I'm so glad you did. Okay, what is it?
Or rather, I didn't look up how old Locke is supposed to be, but I can tell you how old the actors who play his parents are and how old Terry Quinn is. Terry O'Quinn was born in 1952, which when the show was filming would put him at the age of 53. Kevin Teague, the actor who plays Cooper, and Swoosie Kurtz, the actress who plays his mom, were both born in 1944, which means that both of those actors would be 8 years old when Locke was born. Both of them are just 8 years older than Locke. And honestly, they do not look that old. When they both show up at the show, I was like, wait, what? No. No.
That's hilarious. And I'm sure that was intentional a little bit, because I do remember a flashback in the future with young Locke's mom being like, "No, mommy, I love him." I think that's Locke's flashback.
I mean, here's the thing. If we're being generous, so we know that Locke was in a wheelchair for 4 years prior to landing on the island. So this flashback takes place at least 4 years before present day, which means that version of Locke would be 49. But that still would make his parents 12 years older than him. So
I just I don't even know if it's Terry O'Quinn's real hair, but I feel that the hair is doing more harm than good. Because
I think it's supposed to, though. He's supposed to look bad. He is a late 40s, early 50s man who is working as a clerk in a Toys R Us. Locke's whole story is that completely wasted potential, that anything special that was supposed to happen to him would have already happened. He grew up in a series of foster homes. He felt abandoned his entire life. He never really made much of himself. And that hair is absolutely supposed to look terrible.
All right.
It's also just weird to see any actor who's usually bald with hair. Like, watch any movie where Vin Diesel has hair or Jason Statham has hair. It just looks wrong.
Oh my God, I actually know, because I think Jason Statham was in Timecop 2. And he has a head of hair that does look weird. Or he might have been in Timecop 1. I forget.
Probably Timecop 2. I would guess it would be Timecop 2.
It's probably Timecop.
I think the only thing he was doing in the 80s was dancing in a thong in music videos.
Oh.
I could be wrong.
I'm so glad that he has a career now. Anyway, I will say this was one of those things too in the flashback where we talk about like horror tropes and themes. I took a video of this because, again, since I can't screenshot it, it won't let me. But I'll have to send it to you, because Locke's mom does just appear in the same way that in like a horror movie, when like you have like the kids in the woods and they're like, what could possibly go on? And like in the background, you just see like a person.
Yep.
Yep. And she very much, it's like, like between that and like the dire wolf overcoat, I'm like, oh man, this is
that was such a nice touch, is that like it's a jacket that's clearly out of place. Like it's nobody else is dressed like that. She looks like a crazy person.
Yeah. And yeah, gonna trap that mouse.
I was curious about that, because clearly the mouse trap is meant to, but is it mean that Locke is caught in a trap? Does it mean that Boone is the one caught in the trap? Does it mean
there's definitely a parallel with Boone that I'll get to, because I think it was super intentional. But no, yeah, I mean he's being hoodwinked, and I think they make that clear because then later when the mom reappears after the con has been done, she appears in very normal, properly fitting outfit.
Yep.
And it's like, you were dressed up to catch his eye between the very red hair and the dire wolf overcoat. It's
and all of that was set up by Cooper. Like he probably told her exactly how to dress, exactly what to say. He is a professional.
Oh yeah. Oh man.
On the island, Locke and Boone are setting up a trebuchet to break the hatch glass. And what's funny is that I could be wrong here, but this was certainly my first introduction to a trebuchet, and now I feel like they are so common in both films and video games and stuff that it would be silly for Boone to be like, I can't even spell trebuchet. So I'm gonna say that Lost is the originator of the trebuchet trend. So
I think that's fair. I think that there's a lot of stuff like that winds up in like once it becomes part of the public discourse. Because as much as I hate the show The Big Bang Theory, one of the early episodes, they make the comment that strawberries aren't fruit. And
Huh?
everyone just now knows that or like quotes it. And I'm like, yeah, yeah.
What are they?
Strawberry. Oh, I don't know what they are. I just know that a fruit is anything that has seeds on the inside. So even a cucumber.
Oh, right. Okay. And as we learned from the West Wing, what when Bartlett asks, like, what fruit has seeds on the outside? Just one of his shitty,
Oh, he
I'm so
probably does.
smart moments where he's just like, how do you not know this? And they're like, come on, man, stop it.
I love his. There are 3 words in the English language that start with DW. What are they?
It's like, we already know you're the smartest guy here. Stop being a jackass. We learn that they've been working on the hatch for 2 weeks, and the airplane head at the top of the trebuchet absolutely shatters against the hatch and does no damage whatsoever. And this is the first time, I think, that we see Locke lose his temper on the island. Like, we've seen him.
I think that's right.
Yeah, we've seen him upset in flashbacks, but I was thinking about all the Best Cowboys Have Daddy issues where Jack severely tests his patience and he's annoyed, but he never loses his temper with Jack. Even when they're dealing with the others, all the setbacks, this is the first time he really just loses it. And certainly in front of Boone.
Yeah, I think that's right, and certainly intentional.
Mm-hmm.
I will say too, just like I didn't, I know now from having seen the series that the hatch is like this colossal thing, but watching this episode for the first time in a long time, it really was a reminder of when they show that this is like this industrial sized water cooler. I'm like, oh, I think that's the thing that was lost on me prior is they see basically like a window in the ground. It's like, we're going to open that. And I do recall the first time I was watching this being like, why? Like, what significance is it? And like, yeah, like seeing that is this gigantic thing. It's like, oh, okay. This definitely has me a bit more intrigued of like, what is this? What's inside there?
Regarding that, according to Javier Grillo, Mark's Watch, so JJ had pitched the idea of the hatch very, very early on, like as early as the pilot. But Lindelof didn't want to introduce it until he knew definitively what was inside of it. And so some of the things that they had talked about it being was it was part of a submarine that had been dumped on the island, and then like a nuclear submarine that had been basically covered in earth to prevent it from being a danger. One was an entrance to the Arctic polar bear habitat. One was a biodome. There was a couple other things, I think. And it wasn't until Lindelof literally walked into the into the office one day and said, there's a guy inside of it, and he has to press a button every 108 minutes or the world ends. That's what it is. And it wasn't until he said that they first put them finding it in the jungle. So it was only until Lindelof had decided that's what's in there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I kind of like, of all those, I actually kind of like the idea that it's the exhibit for the Arctic polar bears the most.
Yeah, right.
Because I am like, that would be kind of neat to like be in an abandoned aquarium, and then you'd be like, why was this? Why did you have this here? While still giving like an interesting change of scenery. Honestly, that does prompt more questions than answers. Because anyway, fascinating. A couple things I really liked about this scene. One is I like that they do just gloss over that Boone asks him, hey, 1 minute you're quoting Nietzsche and the next you're an engineer.
Yep.
And they don't, it's like, that is a question I have, but they're just going to move past it. And I also like the idea that it's like, John's like, well, I can be whatever I want to be. Because he's role playing.
My headcanon is that it's a mix of two things. It's that Locke has always been very interested in stuff like that, but hasn't really been able to commit to any one thing, which is why he's so lost in life, which, oh boy, can I relate to. And the other is that when you are in a wheelchair, it severely cuts down on the other activities that you can do in life. And so I imagine he spent a lot of the last 4 years just reading.
Yeah. And yeah. So no, I agree. I think that it is justified, or I think you can explain it. without it seeming like, when did you have time to do all this?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I do like that they don't explain it. I also like that this feeds into my working theory that Locke was part of the reason he wanted to rehabilitate Boone as like one of the first people is because he has told Boone so much more about himself than he would
Yeah.
want anyone to know.
I forgot that he tells Boone his story in this. I think it's the only person he ever does tell.
Yeah. That's a good point. Well, in any case, like, and he certainly, Boone is the only person that prior to this he told him he worked in a box factory. I think it's interesting that Boone's like, you never talk about yourself. And it's like, I wonder if he does. And for me, that plays to the I don't want people to know that I'm not a hunter kind of thing.
Right.
And then the last thing that I wrote was just, I really like, similar to how Terry O'Quinn delivers that meat and potatoes line, I really like that Locke's response to Boone is, my story would bore you. Although there were not many good things about George A. Romero's Land of the Dead, one of the few moments that I was quite happy with was when the protagonist is asked what his story is, and he's like, no, everyone's got a story, and I don't want to hear about it. And they like move past it. But then later, someone brings up something, and he mentions how like his brother was turned into a zombie and he had to kill him. And the person's like, "Oh, I thought your story was boring." He's like, "Well, that didn't happen to me. That happened to my brother." And I'm like, "Oh, you clever compartmentalizer." Anyway, it reminded me of that, and I like stuff like that when it feels very writerly, but not in a bad way.
Yeah. Oh, a piece of shrapnel embeds deep in Locke's leg, but he can't feel it. And then that night, while he's bandaging himself, he tests his leg and finds that he can't feel anything. The next morning, they're working on another trebuchet, and Locke's legs aren't working well. That look on Locke's face when he's poking himself, and then he takes the burning stick and he jabs it into the sole of his foot, he conveys it very well, that it's, 19 episodes. He's been this rock. He has total faith in the island. He loves the miracle that's been given to him, and he has no reason to worry. And to think that this is suddenly being taken away he's terrified. We get our next flashback. Locke confronts the woman in the parking lot, and she says she's his mother. And him getting hit by the car is very much a fake out of like, up. Is this how we got the wheelchair? No. We learn that Locke was never adopted, that he was only raised in a series of foster homes. And his mom tells him that he's special, part of a design, and that he was immaculately conceived, like Jesus. And he doesn't look like he disbelieves her. It doesn't look like he believes her, but instead of him just having a look on his face, he's like, oh, okay, well, you're clearly crazy. It's just him taking in this information, like that maybe.
This is one of the things I really liked about Terry O'Quinn, because as much as I think Matthew Fox and Josh Holloway have been crushing it, Terry O'Quinn has a really subtle performance this whole episode. And I think this gets exemplified in the next flashback scene a bit more with the PI that I'm sure we'll talk about. But yeah, like, given the events of the rest of this episode, I definitely get the impression that he thinks she's crazy. But, like, yeah, you're working at a Walmart. He knows how to handle these people. Where, like, and I think they tried to show this too with, like, she puts, like, 8 or 9 spoonfuls of sugar in her coffee. Like, he is watching her do this and is like, okay. Like, and I think that he knows, like, yeah, obviously I wasn't immaculately conceived. And I think that it is something that he probably wants to hear, is that he's special. But he's also like, okay, this woman is she's spitting some nonsense. Let's just delicately handle her, and I'll get a PI later.
I think for me it was more of just that, Locke's whole life he feels like a failure, and to hear someone say, even somebody who he knows is probably crazy, say that he's special, it clearly has an effect on him. Like, even like when he first meets Cooper for the first time, like, he is so starved for some kind of family, for some kind of approval, for anyone to tell him that he's worth something. And oh boy, Poor Locke.
I mean, he definitely plays this well as a man who has never known love.
Yeah. Oh God. Speaking of which, I just have just a general note here that the whole Sawyer needs glasses storyline is non-essential to anything that happens on the island. It is a B plot that is clearly there to fill out the episode. All of that said, I do enjoy it very much.
I love it. As soon as they cut to this next scene of Sawyer talking to Sun, I'm like, yeah, they're picking up that thread that they left a little scene for. God, I love it. I love everything that happens with this plot.
It is really neat how they will do that, is that they really just leave that hanging in the previous episode where Sawyer just gets mad out of nowhere and just stalks off. And in any other show, you'd be like, well, that's a complete non sequitur. What the hell was that all about? But with Lost, and that's why the show works so well if you want to binge it, is that it just follows right on from that. It's like, okay, we know that there is a reason there, and we're gonna get back to it.
That's the thing. I wrote this down because, God, I'm just gonna beat up on Grey's Anatomy. I mean, they don't need my help to get beat up on. I still, as a complete digression, I think it's hilarious because I was watching the Grey's Anatomy up until their COVID season, where the lead actress, Ellen Pompeo, she was so visibly done that she, for the COVID season, gets COVID and goes into a coma for the entire 22 episodes of the season until she finally wakes up at the end. And it is clear that it's like, you were probably paid in the ballpark of $50 million, maybe $50 million an episode for all I know.
I don't think that's
to lay in bed.
I don't think they get paid $50 million an episode.
She gets paid a lot of money.
You know what? I'm gonna look this up because that's just so. I get the point you're making, but that's Ellen Pompeo salary per episode. Here we go. Okay, Ellen Pompeo is paid $550,000 per episode, which is very good.
Okay.
But it is not $50 million. That is, you could make 5 Games of Thrones for one episode.
Okay. $50 million, not quite. But, yes.
Oh, shit. Hold on a second. Hold on. She racks in an additional $6 million for syndication profits, totaling $19 million a year.
That's still not $50 million an episode, but.
No, but that's, goddamn.
It's
wow.
Significant. So, but it's so funny to me because apparently, like, she has been, and maybe not even low key, because it seems like it's been very obvious. For the last several years, she's like, I don't want to do this. I'm done. And they've just been like, whoa, how much money? And she's like, I don't know. Give me another 100,000 and we'll fine. I'll lay in a bed. To a point where they have cut other actors and actresses due to the fact that her salary keeps going up because it feels like she's literally trying to push herself out. And this year she has finally quit.
How long has she been on that show?
24 years. But wow. She's still going to do the voiceover narration for it. But anyway, why was this relevant? I mentioned this because you mentioned liking this subplot of Sawyer. And yes, it is not essential. What I like about it is that when I watched Grey's Anatomy, every single episode, the reason why these shows are a mouthful, and you genuinely feel like someone just keeps shoving food in your mouth, like the Jim Carrey Grinch movie, is because every single episode, every single plot is the best and worst day of someone's life. To a point where, and I kid you not, at one point, a guy who is engaged to a woman who he served in the military with, and they've been through a ton of shit, he's in the middle of a surgery, and his fiance accidentally butt dials him because she's getting felt up in the break room by her secret lover. And as they start canoodling, he's doing surgery and is like, oh, can you guys answer my phone? That's my fiance. And so over speaker, as he's performing this life or death surgery, you just hear his fiance's sex noises with another man. And everyone's like, do we keep doing the surgery or do we hang up the phone? And it's like, this is this is so hyperbolic that it's like, you couldn't just maybe just have a scene of two people at home where she's like, I don't love you anymore. That wouldn't be enough. It has to be the best and worst of their lives. Anyway, all of this is to say that, yeah, having Sawyer need glasses, totally fine. And it's enjoyable. And I like it. And if you want to dig into it more, I like that, for instance, he's going to Sun, because we know from like the last 2 episodes that she's probably on the outs, and we know that she and her husband have more or less divorced, but he's on the boat. So I bet he's probably trading information about Jin for her help. And
yeah, I took it more as like he just doesn't want to go to Jack.
It's probably what it is. But like, I like that you could, in terms of Sawyer being in a place of vulnerability, I think you could also view it as like I've got a quid pro quo going with this lady, so I can keep this going. But yeah, I like this plot.
So he's asking Sun about the leaves for his headaches. Aspirin doesn't help. And Kate asks Jack about what can cause bad headaches. Jack knows immediately that she's asking for Sawyer, and his is so condescending. I don't like Jack in this episode. He comes off as so smug and so possessive of Kate that and even at like the end of the episode where he's like, I didn't do it for him. That's supposed to be romantic, and instead it's just like we talk about in what episode was I just editing? Whatever the case may be, where he treats Sawyer like a garbage person, and this is like, and I get it. Jack even, he has the line. He says that all I'll get for my trouble is a snappy one-liner, and if I'm lucky, a brand new nickname. Like, I get that. Nobody wants that. But I think he's too mean to Sawyer. He comes off as a jerk. I think he's a jerk at this episode.
I agree. He's a jerk, but I loved it. I think this is Jack having a blast and also providing a service in a way of like, just so you know, Kate, this is the type of person you're getting into bed with.
See, but that's and that is what it is, and it's so. Again, they were never a couple. He has no right to be so pissy about this.
But like, I do agree. I think like the outbreak STD, like it is mean. But at the same time, I'm kind of like, yeah, Jack's patient with him. He gives him everything that he wants, and it is literally just like at any point, Kate chooses to be there. Jack doesn't ask for this. Jack approaches Sawyer on his own, and Sawyer does exactly what he says he's going to do, which is just provides one-liners. And Jack's like, I just don't want to deal with this bullshit. Like, I think that context is so important, because it would be one thing if Kate immediately brings him in and he starts asking him these questions. But because it's followed after Jack's like, I see you've been having some headaches, and Sawyer just keeps like being like, piss off. And he's like, okay, fine, I'm done. And it's like, no, Sawyer brings the third party in. And so I think, as mean as it is, I feel much more like I can laugh at this because I think that Jack was patient with Sawyer. I also very much love that whole sequence where Jack is shaving and Kate says, say you've been having bad headaches. And he stops shaving. He's like, are you okay? Yeah. And she's like, yeah. And then he goes into then who are we talking about, Kate? Sawyer. And he's like, he goes right back to shaving. He's like, uh-huh. And I just, so good.
I did also like, just from a technical or a practical standpoint, that we're showing that, the reason Jack's beard isn't growing is because they do still have some razors lying around.
Yeah.
It's nice to see that, because, we do know, later on that Jack can grow a beard. It looks like a fake beard, but he can grow one. Yeah. In the next scene, Boone is so assertive that it's a dead giveaway that this is a dream.
Yeah.
Boone would never talk this way to Locke or anybody in real life. Locke says the island will send a sign. This whole nightmare vision is effectively weird and creepy. We've got what I want to say is called overcranking or undercranking on the mom, when you've got that really like staccato movement. And And we talked about this before, that it's the first time that we see, apart from Locke getting the ability to walk, that the island is directing him somewhere, that it's actually using its power to show him something concrete. Because, there's no way that Locke would know about the Beechcraft, or that he would know about Teresa falling up and down the stairs, or that why he would see Boone. It's weird. It's a weird moment, and it's effectively weird. It could have come off as hokey, but it has that very sort of otherworldly surrealness that you get in dreams.
I'm fairly sure, but I have no way to verify this, that they took Shannon's scream from the pilot and play it over the dream sequence.
There is a scream in there, and you are probably right. I was like, that scream sounds familiar, but I don't remember where it happens in this episode. So yeah, that's interesting. Locke wakes up Boone early and takes him to find the plane. I still find it interesting that Boone is still sleeping on the beach. Like they're not camping in the jungle, which makes sense considering they don't know what the hell is out in the jungle. But the idea that they hike out to the hatch every day, or at least that Boone does, is I hadn't realized that.
Oh yeah.
In the flashback, we find that Locke hired a private investigator. I forget if we learn later that Cooper actually hired this investigator for Locke to hire, but I don't know if that's a thing. He could just be a PI. Because it seems like the PI would have uncovered something about maybe Cooper being a con man, but maybe not. I mean, if Cooper's covered his tracks well enough.
This was one of my questions, was if the PI is working for Cooper.
Yeah.
And there's one thing he says in this flashback that seems that maybe he is. And the only reason I'm hesitant is because I get the impression that Locke has done something like this before, where I think that it feels like otherwise they would have had a scene of Locke in a flashback being like, so how's this work? I do this and you give me money, or like what? But like, that's why I'm inclined to think that this PI is Locke's. Either he's investigated where his parents were in the past, or he has been approached by people before claiming to be his long lost brother or sister, and he's like, well, I might as well start figuring this stuff out. But the one thing that made me think that maybe this PI is a plant from Cooper was that he says that his mom has been institutionalized many times for nonviolence, for schizophrenia. But on the forums, they say that she self-admits herself. So I thought that was an interesting, I guess it may not necessarily be contradictory, because I'm sure that there's probably been times where she has been institutionalized and other times where she's self-admitted. But I thought it was interesting that on the sheet, they show that the most recent one has been a self-admitted. So it seemed like the PI either got that information wrong or was trying to add to Cooper's overall con, where he's like, don't trust this lady, focus on your dad.
No, yeah, that's a good point. It also points out that if his mom has a history of schizophrenia, that Locke may have something similar.
That's a great, I didn't even think of that. But yeah, man. Yeah.
So when the PI gives him a file on his dad, he warns him that this won't have a happy ending. And boy, howdy.
I will say, so this is actually where I sent you the clip of the end of The Dictator, because this episode in particular, they give you tons of those arc numbers. So it very much feels like they know people are paying attention, which is also why I paused it on the self-admitted forms. She was also born on October 15th, 1940, which is the day that The Dictator came out.
Huh.
And the reason why I mentioned this, because in that final monologue, of course, one of the many things mentioned is that they are not men of machines, which I feel like Anthony Cooper is, because he is on dialysis. The other thing is that this apparently came as a bit of he was working through something,
Charlie Chaplin?
Yeah. So Charlie Chaplin, part of the whole reason of allegedly making the film, was that he was born within like 6 days or something, or 8 days actually, I think, of Hitler. And of course, in that same time period, you've got Hitler and you've got Charlie Chaplin. And they're like, there's a weird sense of cosmic good and evil that comes from having the tramp in the same spectrum that you get Hitler. And so apparently this was him when he made the Dictator movie. He was working through some of that of like, I was born close or near as Hitler, and we both went with the like, you know, Hitler adopted the Chaplin stash, and it's like, okay, this is weird.
You know, this would all seem like such a crazy deep dive, except this is the kind of shit that Lost would start to do. So I really wonder, maybe this was totally deliberate.
I 100% think it is, just because of the whole good and evil stuff. But yeah, like, you could have chosen, you could have chosen not to show her birth date.
True.
And we know that they want us to pay attention because, as we'll see later with Locke's license plate, they want you to be able to look at it.
Wait, so you said that so her canonical birth date is 1940?
Yeah.
So that would actually make her around 16 years old, at least 16 years old when she had Locke. So, yeah, that's interesting.
And, you know, like, that whole speech is very much about, like, wanting to pave the way for equality and for everyone to rise up, which does seem to appeal to Locke's whole ideology. And again, just the person he's really shouting at the end of The Dictator is the men of machines, which is Anthony Cooper. So I liked it. I think that was intentional.
Yeah, no, that's wild. So he goes to the palatial estate of Anthony Cooper, meets his father, who mentions that if Locke was immaculately conceived, that would make him God, which is who Locke ends up screaming at the end of this episode. And Cooper invites him to hunt. And Locke, who's never had a father, accepts. Back on the island, Locke tells Boone about his dream vision. Boone asks him if he's been using the paste that he gave to him on Hearts and Minds. And he convinces Boone that the vision is real by mentioning Teresa. Meanwhile, Mike and Jin are working on the boat. Mike is picking up a little bit of Korean. And Jack checks up on Sawyer, who says that my insurance ran out, which Jack seems to credit as legitimately funny. They talk about his symptoms. Sawyer mentions his uncle died of a brain tumor. all of Sawyer's stuff there is great, where it's like he's being smarmy, but he also is like genuinely concerned. And Jack asks him, like, well, what kind of, cancer did he have? He's like, the kind that kills you.
Yeah. No, and I forget what other scenes or episodes they do this with, but yeah, there's been so many times where, yeah, Sawyer will just immediately be like, get out of here. And then, like, someone's like, all right, fine, I'm out. And he's like, well, okay, fine. Like, he so hates being on the back foot.
Yeah. It's also like he just reflexively just has to give people shit, and then has to reset and just be like, okay, I got it out of my system. Please help me.
By far, something that people of the podcast listening to the podcast probably wouldn't know about or care about, but I really love that when Sawyer or what Jack mentions that it may cause phantom smells. How after Jack does walk away from the whole situation, Sawyer looks just like Iris, the cat, just like kind of sniffing the air, like
yeah, very much like not wanting to be seen to be smelling, but is very much smelling to see if he smells.
Yeah, I love that.
It was great. Here's something I was wondering about. While trekking through the jungle, Locke checks a compass, and I'm wondering if this is a continuity error, because we have previously established that A, compasses don't work right on the island. Not that they don't work, but they don't work accurately. And B, Locke explicitly told Saeed that he doesn't need one anymore. And so, is this a continuity error, or is this a very, very subtle sign that Locke is losing his connection to the island and he no longer knows where he's going?
Ooh. I'm going to say both. Because it is a continuity error, because he not only does he say he doesn't need it, but he also gives it to Saeed. So the fact that he has one. Yeah. So that's definitely a continuity error. But I will say that does make sense in terms of, yeah, he's losing his connection that makes a ton of sense in terms of the actual, like, as not only does he losing his legs, but how else can you show this? So, yeah, I think, yeah, it's both.
Locke falls, and they find a rosary and a corpse of a priest, or a man dressed like a priest. In the flashback, Locke returns for another hunt. We don't know how many hunts they've done at this point, at least one, but this seems to have become a regular thing with him and his dad. And Cooper clearly gave him the wrong times that he'd show up to see his dialysis.
Oh, yeah.
You know, we talked in the Confidence Man episode about how Sawyer does the con so well that you don't know that he's running the con. Like within the universe of the show, Sawyer is a good actor. Whereas Anthony Cooper, like, especially like that little like shake of the head that he gives Locke when he's like, I thought you said 11. And he doesn't even say no. He just shakes his head. Like, I get that we're supposed to distrust this guy, but like, I never trust this guy. He's just a little too.
You mean every way he enunciates birds?
Yeah, it's just like Kevin Teague is a great, antagonist, but it's just, I never believed that this guy had Locke's interest at heart. He always comes off as not a good dude.
Yeah. No, it's very clear.
Mm-hmm. On the island, Locke notes that the clothing would completely decompose within 2 years, might last as long as 10 years for high-quality polyester, which, certainly feels like a retcon of what Jack said in the previous episode where they find Adam and Eve, where he's like, this clothing wouldn't degrade for 40 or 50 years or something.
Yeah, I had to look that back up because I'm like, Pierce specifically called this out, and I was like, yeah,
in a jungle, it would just completely disintegrate, or even just melt into goo when the body just liquefied. Jungles are not good for preserving anything.
I was surprised to hear from my cousin-in-law, who is now a doctor, that when they're working with cadavers, there were a number of people whose brains of the cadavers were just mostly liquid. Like, I always assumed that the brains retain the shape, and it's like, nope, kind of like a jellyfish out of water sometimes.
It's very much so. Maddie, I don't know if she still does, but she used to watch these videos about people who work with cadavers, and they actually take out a brain, and you see it, and the longer you hold the brain in your hand, the more it starts to just melt is the wrong word, but it very much like, it's not like a sponge. It, like, you would think, like, because of for me, like, I see a cartoon and like a brain is like, they pop it out of like a cartoon character's head and it's like this spongy thing and you put it there. But no, it's more like silly putty. To think that, like, that's us. We're just this silly putty submerged in spinal fluid or whatever. Like, it's really weird. Also, the spinal cord is also extremely soft. It has the consistency of a banana. I have read, which is why you need a backbone to shield it. But yeah, your goo on the inside, and it's it's always unsettling. Locke knows what Nigerian naira is.
I didn't.
I'm willing to accept a lot of things about Locke, but I don't know. I would have accepted it more if Locke like looked at the currency and was like, well, there's a picture of the country Nigeria on the currency, so maybe that's what it is. But for him to just offhandedly be like, yeah, this is Nigerian naira, that's the currency that they use in that country. I don't know. It
was definitely a hair too far. I was like, well, maybe there's a board game like Risk where and I'm like, no. No, this isn't even like vaguely like, maybe it's from somewhere in Africa. Nope, just Nigerian. What is it? Nigerian naira?
I think he said naira. Yeah.
It did make me look up though briefly, because around the same time that his mom was born, not the day, but that year, Nelson Mandela would have been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And I'm like, maybe that's a connection, but I don't think so. or I'm sorry, not 1940, but her driver license was expiring in 1994, and
Ah.
I believe it's something like I'm a year off, where like it was either that he would have been awarded it for the year of 1993, but he's given the award in 1994. Like, but I was like, is there a South African connection somewhere? And it was
No, now you're
no, that was,
now you're just beautiful minding it, where you're drawing all these
yeah.
connections. But that's what the
There's
show
no reason,
does.
there's no reason for Locke to know what Nigerian money looks like.
He also finds a gun. I don't remember if they take it, but it is there. On the beach, Sawyer is sensitive to both light and sound, and Kate finally drags him to Jack, and his delivery of "Do I get a lollipop" is so aggravated. It is fabulous.
Yes, I adore this. That's all I wrote for that scene. Is I was like, do I get a lollipop?
Because also, like, eventually Lily is so small and he's so big, and she's just dragging him away. As we have previously mentioned, Jack's questions about Sawyer's sexual history are mean, but it is funny to see him clearly uncomfortable, and for Kate is just laughing at him the whole time. Whereas, like, I know there's a lot of women I know who you mentioned all the things that Sawyer's admitting to here, and they would just be like, "Fuck this guy."
Yeah, no, I know that the very first time I ever watched this, I was very uncomfortable. I did what I refer to as I mantis, which is when like I get so uncomfortable that like I kind of reel the arms in. But this time around, I think this is part of the reason why I was so comfortable laughing with Kate in this, is that Sawyer has effectively confessed to Kate in private that he was a prostitute. Like, he slept with women for money. I know that there's more to it, but when you think about, well, that's the thing is like, so when Jack asks him like, have you had sex with a prostitute? I actually don't necessarily even consider this as Sawyer being like, yes, I've paid for sex.
Oh, he 100% has. No, he definitely has.
I'm sure that he has, but I also like, it doesn't feel like sleazy because we know that he's been on the other end of this, where he's effectively been the prostitute. So like, it's one thing when the first time I watched this and they get to that line of questioning, I felt uncomfortable because I'm like, oh yeah, he's so sleazy. Of course he slept with a prostitute because he was so desperate to get his rocks off. But on a rewatch, I'm like, no, he's told Kate that like, yeah, I had a super fucked up childhood and wound up becoming a gigolo and defaulting to this sort of con man life. Like, it doesn't feel like this was a sleazy thing. Like, I also think that he could have easily gotten an STD from one of the many wives that he had to seduce.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And it's like, he did this to get by. I think that's the thing is like the reason why I don't mind laughing with it is because it feels less like I'm making fun of you for how sleazy he is. Yes, that's Jack's intent, and it's clear that that's what he's doing. But the thing is, between Sawyer and Kate, they both know that it's like, no, this isn't necessarily he was a sleazebag. This is I needed to survive, and this was something that happened as a result. And yes, it's embarrassing. Yes, it's painful. But I also, as far as like Sawyer and Kate's relationship goes, I don't think this is anything that she didn't already or wouldn't have already assumed.
That's a very good point.
So I feel okay laughing.
But the fact that we know that Sawyer may have a permanent STD is the only thing I can think about when they hook up in season 3. When clearly they're not using condoms. I was like, Kate, he might be having an outbreak right now. What are you doing? I don't know if Sawyer is the kind of guy who's going to tell you.
I imagine though, honestly, because he did become such a good con man, that if he had something like, it probably is something that he's probably one of those ones that you can clear up because he's like, I gotta make sure I don't leave a paper trail. I gotta get rid of this thing. And if I gotta con a doctor into giving me the meds to take care of it, I don't know. I don't get the impression that he's been. I don't think Sawyer has herpes. is what I'm saying. I think that Sawyer.
Isn't it like 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people have it? Someone on that island's got it.
It's probably Shannon. I mean, no, it's not Shannon.
Like after all of that, In case just giving Jack a look, he's like, he needs glasses. He's being a big baby, and I'm being a jerk. In the jungle, Locke collapses. He tells Boone that he was paralyzed for 4 years. He says the island is taking back its miracle. And Boone has total faith in Locke. And Locke, I think very deliberately, calls Boone son.
Yeah! Help me up, son.
Oh, man. And in the flashback, on the hunt, Cooper calls Locke son. And I mean, that's all that happens in that part of the thing. I just had another note here that, like, he's very good at this con. Like, he knows how to manipulate Locke, but he still comes off as sus to us, the viewer. Like, we know that this isn't going to go well.
Let's go get your bird.
Boone tells Locke that Teresa was his nanny. He's partially responsible for her breaking her neck when he was 6 years old. And Locke starts laughing, and they see the plane.
Par for the course, Locke being diabolical.
Yep. Locke tells Boone that he's going to climb up. I get that it's a show, and this is the drama, but if it were me, and I saw this Beechcraft just precariously perched on the cliffside, I would walk around the cliff to see, hey, maybe there's an easier way up than having to climb, 100 feet up to this thing. But instead, he just shimmies up the branches.
Just goes up. Yeah, no, there's a million better ways to, and as you mentioned, it's for the plot of the show. But yeah. I'm also like, I would also need a little bit more of. I'd be like, what do you think is in the plane? Like,
yeah.
Why do we have to climb into it?
In the flashback, Locke and Cooper are in the hospital, and Locke says this was meant to be. On the beach, Jack brings Sawyer glasses. Which amazing foresight to keep that many glasses from the refugees on the island. Jack tells Sawyer that he has hyperopia and lets Sawyer squirm for a little bit before explaining its farsightedness. Oh, Hurley says that it looks like someone steamrolled Harry Potter after Saeed, in his only appearance, melds two frames together.
I was like, this is so unnecessary, but I love it.
Yeah, it was pretty cool though. I liked that. It was like, oh, of course, that's how you would do that. You would, because you wouldn't, you have to work with what you've got. Yeah, I thought that was neat. And Sawyer is so self-conscious when Hurley makes fun of him, and it's you almost feel bad for him. But Sawyer too is also a jerk, so I think it all balances out. Boone climbs up to the plane and finds a bunch of Virgin Marys full of heroin, and this is a direct reference to Locke's mom, who claims to be a sort of Virgin Mary. We get a map of Nigeria, and the camera briefly pans up to the Sahara, and I think we find out way, way down the line in either season 4 or 5 that there are certain like wormholes basically in the earth that you can travel to or from the island, and I believe one of them is in the Sahara. Because doesn't Locke, when they push the donkey wheel in season 4, that Locke ends up in the desert?
Yeah.
And Whitmore finds him. Yeah.
And Ben does too at one point. And actually, I guess what's her bucket? The super annoying red-haired lady, Charlotte. She digs up a bunch of stuff in the Sahara, I think.
Yes,
like a polar bear skeleton.
Yes, yep, that's exactly what happens. And I think I remember that, like, somebody says something really flippantly. It's like Locke's like, oh, I ended up in the desert or something, and Widmore or somebody just says like, yes, that's one of the exits. And then that's just, it's like that. Don't say that like we're not there yet. I'm not going to get mad about it.
I know. I mean, just thinking about Charlotte, I'm like, I don't want to see her ever. But
so Boone finds the radio, and you actually hear somebody on the other end. And for a first-time viewer, this is an incredible moment. He's actually making contact with what you think is somebody on the outside. But I believe we find out later that this is Bernard.
Yeah. This is an example. There's one more that'll happen in this episode. But this to me is the example of the magician showing how the trick is done and it not being impressive. Like this, because this is like on a first watch, I remember being like, oh, like, and again, that part of that world building of like, hey, we just got contact beyond the recorded message. This is a big deal. So when they reveal that it's Bernard, it's like, oh, that's disappointing.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's an example of a magic trick that, like, this is like Locke getting hit with the car, but instead of immediately him getting up and you're like, oh, okay, so that's not how he became in a wheelchair. This is I'm going to let this linger for the rest of summer into the next season and then reveal it. And it's like, well, that's not worth it. Whereas I think something they did do well is something like the Nigerian plane, where I find that whole story to be very satisfying.
Yeah, it's funny how they, as they create a denser and denser knot of connections and mysteries, that some of them turn out to be really satisfying and some of them don't get answered at all, and some of them get the answers and you're sort of like, well, I don't like that answer. The plane falls and squashes Boone like a bug. This doesn't look like they did this with a miniature. Like, I don't know if they would have built a full-sized plane and actually, like, driven it off a cliff. Like, it looks like a full-sized plane fell off a cliff and smashed into the jungle. If it's a miniature that they did it with, I'm extremely impressed. I couldn't find information on how they did that, but it looks great. And by great, I mean it looks like Boone is not going to make it.
Yeah. No, they yeah.
Boone is left bloody, like in Locke's dream. In the caves, Jack tells Kate that he helped Sawyer for her, which is, again, supposed to be romantic, but kind of feels shitty to me. Locke brings him Boone and lies about how he was hurt, which, as we find out in the next episode, potentially could have saved his life if he'd been able to tell Jack exactly what was going on. But,
it was a sacrifice the island needed.
You're right.
But yeah.
Boone's chest is a mess. Kate is extremely upset. Locke runs away. In the flashback, Locke wakes up alone and knows almost immediately that he's been duped. And his mom shows up and says it was all Cooper's idea, tells Locke that he orchestrated all of this, including telling him that he was immaculately conceived in order to get him to find him. He drives to Cooper's house. The guard won't let him in. And driving home, he breaks down sobbing on the side of the road. He feels utterly abandoned and used. And it's heartbreaking.
There's a few things that are unsaid, but I think are fascinating to think about with regards to Cooper's character and his perception of Locke. Because unlike in typical con man fashion, such as Sawyer, where you do the con and you move on, Cooper clearly thinks so little of Locke, finds him to be so inept that he's like, I don't need to move. He can know where I live. What's he going to do? Jump over the gate? No. What's he going to do? Follow me outside my home? No. That level of disrespect or condescension, he's like, I can do this and walk away, and I don't have to think about it.
He doesn't want Locke for anything other than his kidney. This is all to do that, and once it's done, wipes his hand of it and just goes back to his life.
Yeah.
It's so cold.
And it made me think too more about like Cooper and what's her face, his mom's relationship, where, you know, because then she's like, he gave me the money. He's always been good about that. And it's like, yeah, this is kind of like the Joker in The Dark Knight, how he specifically employs people who are, you know, schizophrenic or wild cards, because it's like, who's going to believe this person? And I'm realizing, like, God, that's so twisted, because I'm sure that he's used her in the past for other things, you know? There's so much unsaid in this kind of a sequence. I completely, by the way, until you mentioned it earlier, missed that, yeah, because he calls himself God, that's Locke shouting at God.
Yeah, he screams God when he's punching the mirror.
In his little pathetic bug, which the license plate, 2 more ARC numbers.
Oh, I didn't even notice that. Yeah,
they have one that's not so subtle. I think it's like 3 ABM, and then I want to say it's like 16-4 or something like that, or 16 and 9 or something to throw it off or whatever. But ABM, because then M is the 13th number, B is 2, A is 1. So that's your. It's stuff like that where it's like, that's why I was like, there's got to be something with the license, because I'm like, this is so intentional.
This show, man.
But
Oh yeah, and then the episode ends at the hatch with Locke sobbing and asking, "Why would you do this?" And then a light turns on inside the hatch.
That was the other one that I put was kind of unsatisfying, is because like it is probably Desmond taking a dump.
Well, we do find out, I think, in early season 2, or maybe at the end of season 2, when we're learning more about his story. He hears Locke screaming at the hatch. I don't know why he didn't hear him at any other point, and he does shine it up. And it's supposed to be actually an uplifting moment for Desmond, because it's evidence that there's other people out there.
Oh right.
Yeah. Because I almost want to say that Desmond is about to commit suicide now that I think about it.
I think you're right.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah, I forget it gets there. It goes there.
Yeah, because I think that's after he accidentally kills Clancy Brown, and he's just alone, and oh man. Anyway, so that's Deus Ex Machina, and we're setting up for the ending of the first season. And as you said, it is a good episode of Lost. It is a very solid episode. You've got some good character moments, and you've got some very sad moments, and the island has shown us a sign.
That's probably a good spot to end it.